Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to my Finding My Way podcast. This is podcast number 26, titled, How Am I Doing? How Am I Doing is a story from my adult years. The collection of stories I have written and am reading to you cover many subcultures in our country that I have interacted with from childhood to my adult and senior years. A more extensive introduction to the Finding My Stories takes place in the beginning of Podcast 1. Regardless of which podcast you are listening to, you will find the story both entertaining and worthy of your reflective thoughts concerning its contents. The stories, as a collection, provide insights into a span of time that has played a role in shaping American culture and influencing its future. The stories provide you with a sense of admiration for the culture's collective courage and our country's commitment to justice and its optimistic willingness to address new challenges. How am I doing? About 20 years ago, I picked up one of my last hitchhikers. Before this adventure, I'd been picking them up on and off for about 15 years. I'd have to travel from Knoxville to Nashville fairly often for education-related meetings during that period. It was a nice way to pass the 4-hour trip. The hitchhiker would tell you his story, and you would tell him yours. When you were finished, you were there. Often the hitchhiker was continuing further west. We'd part ways, wishing each other luck. My wife was worried about my picking people up. She would go through the dangers of it and all the things that could happen. She was right. I still kept doing it. The people were so interesting and nice. Besides, I learned a lot about how others in less fortunate situations than mine cope with life. Still, I was trying to curb my behavior and was picking them up less frequently by the time of this story. I guess I was near Kingston when I stopped for him that morning. He was a young man, fairly fit and well-dressed in casual clothing. The car stopped about 20 feet from where he stood on the side of the interstate. Picking up a satchel, he ran up to the passenger side window as I rolled it down. "I'm going to Memphis," he said, slightly puffing from the run. "I'm going to Nashville, but I can take you that far." "Great," he said as he opened the back door and put his bag on the floor before getting into the front seat. We shook hands as I started the car down the interstate. I made a mental note on how dilated his eyes seemed to be. We exchanged first names. Then he began telling me his story in a rush. He had been in a hospital for some time in Maryland, but his relatives had not come to visit him. So he decided to leave the hospital and hitchhike out to see them. The way he expressed it, he was angry with them and was going to tell them that they should have come to see him. As his story unfolded, it became clear that he was in the Navy. He was a patient at the Bethesda Naval Hospital there. As he talked further about his hospital, I began to suspect that he was in what we used to call the Section 8 ward, the psychiatric ward. It also became apparent that he was probably AWOL, absent without leave, by leaving the hospital without permission. He talked constantly with only perfunctory comments from me, such as, "Oh, and ah." Occasionally I asked questions like, "What do you think about that? How did they react to that?" Or, "How did that make you feel?" Rarely would he look at me as he spoke. Most of the time, he kept his eyes looking straight ahead, straight out the front window. At one point, He explained that he had been up for about 30 hours or so on the road. That was why he was a little hyper and his eyes were dilated. He was okay, he reassured me. I didn't need to worry about that. Whatever that was did have me a little worried. As he told his story, his speech became more rapid, and his voice seemed to change pitch a lot. However, he maintained his straight-ahead stare out the windshield through the long course of his monologue. We were almost to the Lebanon exit before he asked me the traditional question, "What do you do?" Always in the past, when I'm asked this rule-of-the-road question, I tell the hitchhiker that I work with disabled children. This evokes sympathetic responses and triggers more conversation. Everyone has a relative or friend with a disabled child. We get into the strategies that are used to help the child they know about and explore my knowledge for better ideas in understanding how to be of assistance to the child and family. Usually, I don't get into my professional training or its generalized category. I decided that this time I would simply state what I do. I'm a psychologist. Snapping his head from looking out the windshield to stare straight at me, he asked, "How am I doing?" "You're doing well. You're really holding it together well." "Thanks," he said, snapping his head back to looking straight out to the road. He returned to his monologue without asking me another question. About 45 minutes later, we arrived at the exit that would take me from the interstate. We shook hands. He exited the car, waved goodbye, and walked to the rear. As I pulled away, he stuck his thumb out in the hopes of catching his next ride. In the rear view mirror, I saw a car stop for him.